you know Adolf Hitler? You've never seen him like this before. Hitler's contemporaries, from his birth in Braunau to his death in the bunker, authentically flesh out the picture. Who was Hitler? Hitler neither finished school nor had any vocational training. He occasionally lived in homeless shelters or on the street. He refused to pursue a regular job. To this day, it seems inexplicable that he could come to power. Out of nowhere, Hitler became the Führer, leader of the German Reich, one of the most powerful men of the 20th century, starting an inferno that engulfed the world and brought death to millions of people. The nation worshipped him and followed him blindly into the abyss. But during his lifetime, he kept his origins and his life secret. No one should know how or who he was. Fascinating and oppressive accounts from companions, friends, and enemies, as well as the most extensive collection of archive material ever shown. Much of it, hitherto unpublished, reveal who Hitler was and how he could become what he was. A notorious liar and an unscrupulous murderer. Even after the Allied landing in Normandy, and one final failed attempt to fight back in the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler will not accept that there is no way out. Even large parts of the German population still believe in the Führer and are waiting for the miraculous promised turning point. Hitler finally retreats to the bunker under the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, a city day and night under Allied bombardment. When the Russians have more or less surrounded Berlin, in a briefing on April the 22nd, Adolf Hitler declares the war lost. 1 week later, he marries his longtime secret partner, Eva Braun. Not until April the 30th, when the Russians are 500 meters from the bunker, can Hitler accept the finality of his defeat. Now he has to take a decision and act on it.
December the 31st, 1944, Luxembourg. You sat there with a half-empty glass in your hand and listened to the hoarse voice with the unmistakable accent. 2 or 3 times the speaker almost lost his voice. And he also got his words mixed up. But that was always the case when he got excited. It was significant that his throaty bellow no longer wanted to work that New Year's Eve. Stephen Heim, Corporal of the US Army, writer.
For Hitler, extending hostilities meant multiplying the losses, the destruction, the suffering of the German people, just to enable his hopeless pride to live on a few weeks longer. Undoubtedly, having failed, Hitler wanted his work to perish in an apocalypse. Charles de Gaulle, Memoirs.
Diary, Sunday, January the 13th, 1945. Frau Gerstner said today that the Russians were coming. But Herr Lenhardt says that they will never make it to Berlin. The Führer will see to that. Traudl B., housewife, NSDAP member, Berlin.
Diary, Wednesday, January the 24th, 1945. The news from East Prussia continues to be really bad. The enemy is at Elbing and pushing towards Morden, Instenberg, occupied after heavy fighting. Thorn, Posen, Bromberg, Silesia in flight. Oppeln occupied, fighting in Breslau. Henriette Schneider, Witze, District Celle, Lower Saxony.
The remainder of the German army, indeed entire armies, disappeared. They were engulfed by the masses of tanks storming forward. Bernd Freitag von Lohenhofen, army adjutant to Adolf Hitler.
I asked the Führer, "Do you believe then, my Führer, that we can still win the war at all?" Hitler answered,
"We must."
Christa Schröder, Hitler's private secretary.
Diary, January the 26th, 1945. Now we're advancing. We have to march 50 kilometers. Today we'll reach Germany. Vladimir Gelfand, 2nd Lieutenant, 1050th Rifle Regiment of the Red Army.
Adolf Hitler, last radio address to the German people, January the 30th, 1945. Thus, I now appeal to the entire German people to gird themselves with a yet greater, stronger spirit of resistance until we can again, as before, put on the graves of the dead of this titanic struggle a wreath inscribed with the words, "And yet you were victorious." I therefore expect every German to fulfill his duty to the utmost, to make every sacrifice that will and must be required.
Diary, Tuesday, January the 30th, 1945. Big day. Our Führer has spoken. The Russians are coming. But we will be victorious again and beat back the Bolsheviks. Traudl B., Berlin.
In mid-February 1945, we finally returned to Berlin from the Western Front. The close circle around Hitler had taken up its position again. Rochus Misch, Sergeant of Leibstandarte SS, telephone operator in the Fuhrerbunker.
February the 13th, 1945. The model of Linz is finally finished. The extensive model of the development of the Danube riverbanks was now set up in one of the large, brightly toned basements of the new chancellery. When I led Adolf Hitler into this room, he stood for a long time, just looking, as though overwhelmed by the general impression. I moved the spotlight to the position of the sun's rays in the afternoon. Now he was presented with the perspective of how his city on the Danube would look in his retirement. Hermann Giesler, General Building Inspector for the redevelopment of the city of Linz.
During the last 4.5 months of the war, 471,000 tons of bombs are dropped on Germany, twice as much as in the whole of 1943. In March 1945 alone, 3 times as many bombs fall as in all of 1942.
Today, the terrible news came that Dresden has been almost completely destroyed by the Anglo-Americans. Herr Hermann says that we have a new rocket that flies even as far as to the Anglo-Americans. I certainly hope so. Traudl B., Berlin.
Not a day went by when the government quarters were not attacked. When a bomb exploded nearby, the bunker lying in the groundwater swayed noticeably. The light began to flicker, so Hitler raised his voice as if in a dream.
That was close. Those bombs could have hit us.
He was noticeably fearful and didn't feel safe. Christa Schröder.
Diary, March the 13th, 1945. Although the bridgehead is not large, 2.5 to 3 kilometers, it is difficult to drive the enemy out of there since they're dug in on massive, steep fortified hills. Marines are positioned across from us, the battalion with a strength of 400 men. Serious opposition. Vladimir Gelfand, 1050th Rifle Regiment.
It is not necessary to consider the basic things that people need for a primitive further existence. What remained after the battle would in any event be inferior, since all the good ones would have fallen.
Adolf Hitler's answer to a note from Albert Speer,
quoted by Heinz Guderian, March 1945.
Jokes were still being made. Someone said that Berlin was really practical as a headquarters. You could get the local train from the Eastern Front to the Western Front. Hitler could still laugh about it. Gertraud Traudl-Junge, Hitler's private secretary.
In mid-March 1945, Hitler transfers nearly all of his activities to the bunker under the Chancellery. Since then, he rarely sees daylight.
Sometime in mid-March, Eva Braun arrived at the Reichschancellery. Hitler tried his best to get her to go back to Munich, but she made it clear that her place was at Hitler's side, and no one would be able to change her mind. Rochus Misch.
Hitler had always emphasized with resignation that there was only one person who would remain faithful to him in his final hour, and that was Eva Braun. Here, his instinct did not let him down. Albert Speer.
April the 20th, 1945 was always referred to as the date of the last photos and film segments of Hitler and the delegation of the Hitler Youth. This is not true. They are in fact from a different reception of a delegation by Hitler. This took place on March the 20th, 1945. Arthur Axmann, leader of the Hitler Youth.
That was no longer our Hitler as we knew him, but a man marked by fate, an almost broken man, decaying to death. Rudolf Jordan, District NSDAP leader.
Diary, March the 23rd, 1945, midnight. The Fuhrer said that he could see very little with his right eye. His left hand is slightly swollen, due to tremors. Also, his left ankle and left lower leg show swelling in places. The Fuhrer does not want to wear an eye patch. Dr. Theo Morell, Hitler's personal physician.
Beyond the Siegfried Line, our forces consolidate, and the drive becomes like a great river pushing against a series of decomposing dams. One dam breaks, and the torrent lashes onward until it hits another obstruction. Even the most fanatical Nazis must now see that the game is up. Audie Murphy, Lieutenant, most highly decorated U.S. soldier of World War II.
Diary, March the 17th, 1945. The German army is on the run. The best army in the world is pouring back. Where to? The River Weser? Oh God, you fools. You could not defend the Atlantic or the Siegfried Line or the Rhine. What do you think you can do inside Germany? Friedrich Kellner, court employee, Laubach, Hesse.
Diary, March the 28th, 1945. It really is admirable how the Fuhrer, with this dilemma on the front, still persistently believes in his luck. You sometimes have the impression that he lives in the clouds. Joseph Goebbels.
One man climbs out, badly wounded. The cameraman is nearly knocked off his feet by the blast, but he keeps his camera focused as best he can as the hectic fury of the street fighting sweeps around him.
The villages here along the Rhine are in pretty good shape. In the middle, of course, is Cologne, and Cologne is one of the great ruins of the world. The Germans are nice and fat too, and quite clean and orderly and industrious. They carry on their normal lives. Martha Gellhorn, US Army War Correspondent.
Diary, Good Friday, March the 30th, 1945. The report from the army was terrifying. Tank spearheads by Kassel, Fulda occupied, Danzig, Gedingen, Gotenhafen surrendering. What is happening? Henrietta Schneider.
Diary, April 3rd, 1945, Narvik. Holy Week and Easter bring the encirclement of the Ruhr Valley. Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, Peru and Ecuador declare war on us, which means the mobilization of all neutral remaining powers outside of Europe on the side of the Western Allies. Westphalia, Hessia, Thuringia, Franconia, Baden, Württemberg are battlefields. Hungary is lost. Udo from Alvensleben, Captain, Diary.
The Greater German Reich finds itself in a state of war with 52 states, among them the former Axis powers Italy, Romania, Bulgaria and Finland.
During the few weeks of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's fourth administration, I saw what the long years had done to him. It was no wonder that the years had left their mark. Harry S. Truman, Vice President of the United States of America.
Winston, in fairly good form, said that if he were Hitler, he would have himself flown over to this country, hand himself to the government, stating that he alone was responsible for all the evils of Germany, and was prepared to stand the racket. According to Winston, this would face us with a difficult problem. Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, British Forces.
Shortly before 5 o'clock in the afternoon of Thursday, April the 12th, 1945, after the Senate adjourned, I went to the office of Sam Rayburn at the House of Speakers. As I entered, the Speaker told me that the President's press secretary had just telephoned, requesting me to call the White House. I returned the call. "Please come right away," he told me in a strained voice. I reached the White House about 5:25 p.m. and was immediately taken in the elevator to the second floor and ushered into Mrs. Roosevelt's study. Mrs. Roosevelt seemed calm in her characteristic graceful dignity. She placed her arm gently about my shoulder. "Harry," she said quietly, "the President is dead." I had been afraid for many weeks that something might happen to this great leader. And now that the worst happened, I was unprepared for it. Harry S. Truman.
Bridgehead behind the Oder River, west of Kostschön. Roosevelt is dead. I bow my head in deep sorrow for this loss. Vladimir Gelfand.
April the 12th, 1945. There are cities in Germany that make Coventry and Plymouth appear to be the damage done by a petulant child. Edward Murrow, radio correspondent for CBS News.
Diary, Thursday, April the 12th, 1945. Herr Hermann says it would be better if the Americans came. Now I'm really frightened. Traudel B., Berlin.
It was between 3 and 4 a.m. on April the 11th, 1945. Suddenly cries were heard. They grew louder and louder. We stumbled outside to discover the cause. "Look, the gate!" somebody shouted. The crooked swastika had disappeared. Something white fluttered on the flagpole. The delightfully victorious minute for which our German comrades had waited for 4,453 days and nights was finally there. In the evening, an American infantry unit arrived. Thomas Geffer, German Jew, prisoner in Buchenwald.
It will not be pleasant listening. I propose to tell you of Buchenwald. We reached the main gate. The prisoners crowded up behind the wire. There surged around me an evil-smelling stink. Men and boys reached out to touch me. They were in rags and the remnants of uniforms. Death had already marked many of them, but they were smiling with their eyes. Edward Morrow.
Diary, Kungsgatan, Stockholm. A hot scent of blood is blowing from Germany and a terrible feeling of gloom spreading. It feels like the decline of the Western world. Germans have the opportunity to see the horrors. Astrid Lindgren, writer and member of the Swedish Secret Service. Diary.
For a long time, I have been telling myself what's happening in the world now cannot be true, and that I am just imagining it, that I am hallucinating, and at some point I will surely wake up. Ernő Szép, Hungarian Jewish writer from Budapest.
We proceeded to the small courtyard. The wall adjoined what had been a stable or garage. We entered. It was floored with concrete. There were 2 rows of bodies stacked up like cordwood. Edward Morrow.
We are not entirely guiltless, we the Allies, because it took us 12 years to open the gates of Dachau. We were blind and unbelieving and slow, and that we can never be again. We must know now that there can never be peace if there is cruelty like this in the world. Martha Gellhorn.
If Hitler falls into our hands, we shall certainly put him to death. This man is the mainspring of evil. Winston Churchill, Diary of Cabinet Secretary Sir Norman Brooke, July the 6th, 1942.
Diary, Sunday, April the 15th, 1945. My God, the war seems to be lost. Why doesn't the Führer give up? Traudl B., Berlin.
Letter to Marga and Gudrun Himmler, April the 17th, 1945. My dear beloved mummy, my dear little daughter. Times are extremely difficult for all of us, and yet it will all still turn out well. That is my firm belief. But it is difficult. The ancient spirit will protect us, and the good German nation especially, and not allow us to perish. Heil Hitler. Love, Daddy. Heinrich Himmler. Last letter to his family.
On April the 21st, I went directly to the map room for my daily briefing on the war situation. German resistance was collapsing on all fronts. There could be no doubt that the end of the war in Europe was in sight. Harry S. Truman, US President, Memoirs.
On April the 21st, our troops reached the Berlin Autobahn Ring. This success created favorable conditions to totally enclose the fascist capital. Vasily Chuikov, General commanding Soviet 8th Guards Army.
That day, I saw Hitler only briefly. The boss could still not believe that the Russians were at the gates. Rohus Mish.
Zechlin, Mecklenburg. Around 11:50 p.m., Hitler calls. He gives a short lecture on the situation and concludes with the words,
"You will see. The Russians will suffer the biggest defeat, the bloodiest defeat in their history before the gates of Berlin."
Karl Koller, Chief of the General Staff of the Luftwaffe.
Karlsdorf near Berlin, April the 22nd, 1945. Someone said, "It's over. The Russians are here. We should come out." Everyone climbed out of the trench with their hands up. I put my hands up only a little, because I thought I did not have to surrender. Formally, I was on the side of the losers, but my emotions were on the side of the winners. Marie Yalovich Simon, a German Jew hiding in Berlin.
April the 22nd, 1945. This date marks the end of the Third Reich for me. The German Wehrmacht capitulated on May the 8th, 1945. But on April the 22nd, a Sunday, Hitler capitulated. Rochus Misch.
On April the 22nd, we attended the status report at the usual time in the afternoon. I recognized immediately that clouds as heavy as lead were hanging over the room. Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, Memoirs.
I have already reached my decision. I won't leave Berlin again. I will defend the city till the end. Either I lead the fighting around the capital of the Reich, or I perish with my soldiers in Berlin and die in the battle for the symbol of the Reich. Adolf Hitler.
During the status conference, which had been loud and turbulent, Hitler had finally uttered the magical sentence, and since then repeated it to everybody who crept around the bunker disbelievingly.
The war is lost.
Rochus Misch.
Traudel Junge. In the small anteroom, Hitler stands motionless. In a distant and commanding manner, he calls out,
"Get changed at once. In 1 hour, an aircraft will come and take you to the south. Everything is lost, hopelessly lost."
Eva Braun walks up to Hitler, takes both of his hands, and says smilingly and consolingly,
"But you know that I'm staying here with you. I will not be sent away."
As if talking to a sad child. Hitler's eyes begin to light up, and he does something that no one has ever witnessed, not even his most trusted friends and aides. He kisses Eva Braun on the lips.
On the night of April the 22nd, 23rd, my first night in the Fuhrer's bunker, I was witness to a strange spectacle. The rats abandoned the sinking ship. He let anybody go who asked. Bernd Freitag von Loinghofen.
On the evening of April the 22nd, a Sunday, while the besieging ring closes around Berlin, Eva Braun writes the first of her farewell letters to her childhood friend, Hertha Ostermeier.
Letter, Berlin, April the 22nd, 1945. My dearest Hertha, these will be the very last lines and thus the last sign of life from me. We are fighting to the end, but the end is drawing dangerously ever nearer. I can't describe how much I am suffering personally on the Führer's behalf. What else is there to say? I can't understand how it could all turn out this way, but you can't even believe in God anymore. Regards to all my friends. I shall die as I have lived. It's no burden, you know that. Warm greetings to all, and kisses, yours, Eva.
Diary, April the 23rd, 1945, Monday. Early bombing raids over the town of Ulfeld to the east. In the afternoon, buried a chest full of food. Radio reports fighting in Ulm, Regensburg. Berlin is encircled. The Führer in Berlin. Werner Heisenberg, German Nobel laureate in physics.
On April the 24th, our troops attacked along the entire front and pushed the enemy further back in the direction of the city centre. The Soviet 8th Guards Army joined the 1st Ukrainian Front near Johannesthal Airport the same day. One more step remained. Berlin had to be taken, and the war ended. Vasily Chuikov, General.
Diary, 24th of April 1945, Tuesday, radio, crossing of the Danube River at Dillingen, the Americans at Augsburg. Werner Heisenberg.
Almost coincidentally with our arrival on the Elbe, the Red Army launched a powerful westward drive from the positions on the Oder. The Red Drive made speedy progress everywhere. On April the 25th, patrols of the 69th Division of the V Corps met elements of the Red Army's 58th Guards Division on the Elbe. The meeting took place at Torgau, some 75 miles south of Berlin. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe.
The fragmentation of Germany into two parts was completed. The German army dissolved before our eyes. Winston Churchill.
Gloom and doom began to spread throughout the bunker. Arthur Axmann.
April the 27th, 1945. Letter to Louisa Jodl. We still have radio contact with Berlin, where the enemy has fought its way into the city center. One's heart bleeds during these conversations. It's like the Battle of the Visigoths at Vesuvius. Alfred Jodl, Chief of Armed Forces High Command, Flensburg.
The section of the Autobahn between Munich and Augsburg had been converted to an airstrip. In laybys along the road were curious-looking aircraft, sleek and without propellers. One wondered if they had been delivered without them. They were, in fact, the first jet fighters, and a full technological generation more fearsome than anything we or the British possessed. Only a monumental error, Hitler's demand that they be redesigned as a light attack bomber, had kept them from being used with disastrous effect. John Kenneth Galbraith, economist, officer in the Strategic Bombing Command of the US Air Force.
When the sun came out, I worked in the garden with my mother. Berchtesgaden, the mountain retreat where Hitler met with Chamberlain, had been bombed. In London, people prepared to celebrate. Large quantities of liquor were imported but held in reserve for the special day. Flags were everywhere on sale. The Nazis had nowhere left to run. Madeleine Albright, London.
I had close contact with Mornka, the commander of the citadel. Mornka was often with the troops on the front line. On April the 29th, he reported to Hitler that to the north the Russians were a short distance away from Weidendammer Bridge, to the east in Lustgarten, to the south near Potsdamer Platz and the Air Ministry, and to the west in Tiergarten. That was only a few hundred meters from the Chancellery. When Hitler asked him,
"How long can you hold out?"
he answered, 20 to 24 hours at the most. Arthur Axmann.
April the 29th, 1945. Sometime around 11 p.m., a radio dispatch arrived, saying that Italian partisans had shot Mussolini and his mistress Clara Petacci and publicly hanged them by the feet. Had Hitler needed a final push in order to make his own suicide a reality, that was probably it. Rohus Misch.
The Fuhrer comes up to me, shakes my hand and asks,
Have you rested a little, my child? I'd like to dictate something. Get the shorthand pad.
Traudeljunge.
My private will and testament. As I did not consider that I could take the responsibility of contracting a marriage during the years of fighting, I have now decided, before the closing of my earthly career, to take the girl who, after many years of faithful friendship, entered the practically besieged city of her own free will in order to share her destiny with me as my wife. At her own desire, she goes as my wife with me into death. What I possess belongs, inasmuch as it has any value, to the party. Should this no longer exist, to the state. Should the state also be destroyed, no further decision of mine is necessary. Signed, Berlin, April the 29th, 1945, 4 a.m., Adolf Hitler.
April the 29th, 1945. Hitler only wanted to make Eva Frau Hitler to preserve convention at the end. Above all, for Eva's parents. The Browns wouldn't have to live with the shame of their daughter having died as a concubine. Rohus Misch.
The 30th of April begins like the previous days. The hours crawl by. No one knows how Eva Braun should now be addressed. The aides and orderlies stutter with embarrassment when they have to speak to the young lady.
Just call me Mrs. Hitler,
she says with a smile. Gertraud Traudeljunge.
When I left my observation post on April the 30th to go to the army staff, Marshal Georgy Zhukov called and asked, "Is there hope that we will have fully cleaned up Berlin by May Day?" I answered that I did not expect an immediate capitulation, even though the resistance of the enemy had declined. Vasily Chuikov.
On the morning of April the 30th, 1945, signs his final Führer order.
To the commander of the Berlin defensive area, General of the Artillery, Weitling. In the event of ammunition and food shortages among the defenders of the Reich capital, I give my permission to break out. This should be done in small groups, who should then establish a connection with the troops still fighting. Signed, Adolf Hitler.
April the 30th, 1945 will remain in the memory of the Soviet people. On this day at 2:25 p.m., the troops of the First Shock Army took over most of the Reichstag building. Georgy Zhukov, Supreme Commander of the First White Russian Front.
Around noon on April the 30th, 1945, all occupants of the bunker with military training anticipate an immediate assault on the Chancellery and the bunker.
Lunch on April the 30th also passed without any special occurrences. Hitler showed no signs of agitation. With this in mind, there was no mention of the end now being imminent. Gerda Christian, Hitler's private secretary.
On April the 30th, 1945, around noon, Bormann told me that Hitler's decision was now firm. Then Hitler said to me that he would now shoot himself, and that Fräulein Braun would also take her life. The bodies were to be buried. He assigned me to make the necessary arrangements. Otto Günscher, SS Adjutant to Hitler.
I caught a last glimpse of Hitler as he disappeared into his study. Eva, now his wife, followed him. She looked pretty, For me, she is the only one who went truly nobly to her death. In any case, Eva was alive up until death. She had married a dead man in a mortuary. Rohus Mish.
I went back into the bunker in the afternoon. I visited Dr. Goebbels. He told me that the Führer had already bidden farewell to his closest circle. I went to Hitler's private rooms. SS adjutant Otto Günscher stood in front of the door, blocking it with his massive figure. He had orders from the Führer not to let any more visitors in. Arthur Axmann.
My political testament. I die with a happy heart in the face of the immeasurable deeds and achievements of our soldiers at the front, our women at home, the achievements of our farmers and workers, and the efforts, unique in history, of our youth who bear my name. In order to give the German people a government composed of honourable men, I appoint the following members of the new cabinet as leaders of the nation. President of the Reich, Dönitz. Chancellor of the Reich, Dr. Goebbels. Above all, I oblige the leaders of the nation and those under them to scrupulously observe the race laws and to offer merciless opposition to the poisoner of all peoples, international jury. Issued in Berlin, this 29th day of April 1945, 4:00 a.m. Adolf Hitler.
Valet Heinz Linger reports the hour of his death as 3:50 p.m. He says he noted this time from a grandfather clock in the anteroom to Hitler's office. Adjutant Otto Günscher cites his final hour as 3:30 p.m. He said he'd looked at his watch.
There cannot be the slightest doubt that Adolf Hitler took his life in the Fuhrerbunker of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin on April the 30th, 1945, with his own hand, namely by a shot in the right temple. Cause of death, District Court 2, Berchtesgaden, December the 8th, 1956.
The Red Army found a dental bridge of Hitler's after a painstaking search for his remains around the bunker exit.
On April the 30th and May the 1st, 1945, I posted the last radio messages from the Reich Chancellery to Grand Admiral Dönitz via our Naval Signals Brigade. Erich Voss, Vice Admiral.
Telegram in secret Navy encryption. In the place of the current Reichsmarschall Göring, the Führer appoints you, Grand Admiral, as his replacement. You should undertake at once all measures that arise from the present situation. Bormann.
I only learned that Hitler was no longer alive after the first radio dispatch with my appointment was communicated from Berlin on April 30th at 6:15 p.m. Karl Dönitz, Grand Admiral, Commander-in-Chief of the Navy.
Announcement Hamburg Radio, May the 1st, 1945, 10:26 p.m. It is reported from the Führer's headquarters that our Führer, Adolf Hitler, has fallen at his command post in the Reich Chancellery, fighting to his last breath against Bolshevism and for Germany.
May the 1st, 1945. A little later in the evening, my husband came to my bed and said,
Adolf Hitler is dead. He's dead.
There was suddenly an eerie calm. Emmy Göring, actress and wife of Hermann Göring.
On the evening when Hitler's death was announced,
I was sleeping in a small room in Dönitz's quarters. When I unpacked my bag, I found the red leather case containing Hitler's portrait. When I stood the photograph up, I was overcome with a fit of weeping. Albert Speer, minister in Dönitz's cabinet. Memoirs.
Interrogation of Mrs. Paula Wolf, Miss Paula Hitler.
My brother's fate affects me very much. No matter what happened, he was still my brother. His end brought indescribable sorrow to me, his sister.
At this point, Miss Hitler burst into tears, and the interrogation was ended. Signed, George Allen, U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, July the 12th, 1945.
I was living in Hitler's private apartment in Munich when his death was announced. No Germans, unless they are underground resistance workers or concentration camp inmates, find that Hitler did anything wrong except to lose. I'm just like the soldiers here, who look at the beautiful countryside, use the super modern comforts of their buildings, and wonder why the Germans wanted anything more. Lee Miller, U.S. war photographer.
Before I could declare the event closed on that evening of May the 1st, an agency report was handed to me that prompted me to tell the audience, "Dear friends, Hitler has evaded responsibility by committing suicide. We departed deeply moved." Willy Brandt, Stockholm.
Diary, May the 1st, 1945. History will record forevermore that the German people were not able to shake off this National Socialist yoke by their own initiative. Friedrich Kellner, Laubach.
Diary, Wednesday, May the 2nd, 1945. Adolf Hitler is no more. Radio reported his heroic death last night, fallen in battle. Dönitz has been appointed as his successor. Mussolini murdered a few days ago. Now the two friends are united in death. Henrietta Schneider.
Hirsch's cell examined Rudolf Hirsch, 46, commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp. I asked him whether he didn't think he would hang for murder.
No, never.
When did it first occur to you then that you would probably be brought to trial and hanged?
At the time of the collapse, when the Fuhrer died.
Gustav Mark Gilbert, U.S. prison psychologist, Nuremberg Diary.
The White House, Washington, May the 8th, 1945. Dear Mama and Mary, I am 61 this morning, and I slept in the President's room in the White House last night. This will be an historic day. At 9 o'clock this morning, I must make a broadcast to the country announcing the German surrender. Isn't that some birthday present? Lots and love to you both. Harry S. Truman, President of the United States of America, letter to his mother and sister.
It was not disloyalty, but rather his suicide that put an end to Hitler's organization. He and his organization were one and the same, and thus it ended with him. This man who rose out of nothing had offered himself to Germany at a time when it was longing for a new magnet. He formulated a doctrine based on a mixture of fascism and race theory. The totalitarian system allowed him to act without restraint. The mechanization of the military gave him the trump cards of lightning attacks and surprise. All of this led to repression, and that, in turn, led to these crimes. Charles de Gaulle, Memoirs.